This is the story of Dale Evans and the person she supposedly hated more than anyone. Searching through biographies, archives, interviews, and 50 years of Hollywood history turns up no verified evidence that Dale Evans truly hated anyone during her career. And that fact might be more interesting than any manufactured feud. 50-plus years in Hollywood, 3 divorces before age 35, being forced to publicly deny her own son's existence, getting fired for getting married, and losing 3 children to tragic deaths, Dale Evans went through all of that and remained remarkably free of enemies. Biographer Chris Enns noted that few people were as honest, kind, and forthcoming as Roy and Dale, so today we're exploring the real conflicts in Dale Evans' life, the tensions that did exist, and why the absence of documented hatred is itself a compelling story about resilience and character. Who was Dale Evans? Dale Evans was born Frances Octavia Smith on October 31, 1912 in Uvalde, Texas, and she'd become known as the Queen of the West. At 14 years old, she eloped with Thomas Frederick Fox, gave birth to a son named Thomas Jr. at 15, and found herself divorced by 17 after her husband left her twice within the first 6 months of their marriage. Self-supporting single motherhood in an era when that was scandalous became Dale's reality from that point forward. Singing jobs eventually led her to radio station WHAS, where the station manager suggested she change her name to Dale Evans, and she protested by saying Dale's a boy's name, but accepted it as euphonious and kept it for life. 20th Century Fox signed her in 1942 for $400 a week, and 2 years later, Republic Pictures cast her opposite Roy Rogers in The Cowboy and the Senora. Between 28 and 35 westerns with Rogers followed, though as we'll see, this was far from her dream role. The Herbert Yates conflict, the closest thing to a feud. Herbert J. Yates ran Republic Pictures, and the most concrete professional conflict in Dale Evans' career involved him, though even this stops short of being a true feud, and it represents the clearest tension with another individual in her documented history. Westerns were not what Dale Evans wanted. Broadway musicals and hopes of starring in the film version of Oklahoma filled her dreams. So when Yates cast her opposite Roy Rogers in 1944, she felt devastated. Her own words tell the story. "I like to be active in a role and hate namby-pamby heroines. Western roles are ones in which the girl just stands around while men do violent and admirable things." Going directly to her agent, she said, "No, no, 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 I should not do this. I'm not a Western actor." The billing order told you everything you needed to know about how Republic Pictures valued Dale Evans, and that wasn't even the worst insult. Roy Rogers received top billing as expected, but his horse, Trigger, received second billing, while Dale's name appeared at the bottom below the studio's name and logo. A horse got more prominent credit than she did. Those 28 to 35 westerns with Roy Rogers happened between 1944 and 1951, despite her objections. And here's the irony. In 1947, she became the first woman to appear in Motion Picture Herald's poll as a top moneymaker. The genre she resisted made her a star. Refusing to renew her Republic contract in 1946, she hoped to move to RKO for musicals, but eventually she returned to work with Roy at Republic, and that's when Herbert Yates delivered his most significant blow. December 31, 1947 brought Dale's marriage to Roy Rogers at the Flying L Ranch in Davis, Oklahoma. Herbert Yates disapproved of Roy Rogers marrying his co-star, but he couldn't punish one of his biggest box office draws, so in January 1948 he fired Dale instead. Walter Winchell reported shortly after the wedding that Dale got a nice wedding present from Republic Studios, which also employs her groom. She got fired. You might expect this to launch a bitter, lasting feud, but it didn't work out that way. Dale later returned to work with Roy at Republic, and in 1951 both she and Roy left the studio amicably when Republic refused to allow Roy television appearances. Controlling their own careers meant more to them than burning bridges or engaging in public feuds. The hidden son, guilt, not hatred. The most painful conflict in Dale Evans' life wasn't with another person at all, and instead it was an internal struggle that lasted nearly a decade and involved being forced to deny her own son's existence. Hollywood in 1940 brought Dale face-to-face with her agent, Joe Rivkin, who gave her strict instructions about the story she needed to tell the world. 21 years old was her age, though she was actually 28. She was not married, and she was definitely not the mother of a 12-year-old son whom she was to introduce as her younger brother. Both 20th Century Fox and Republic Pictures promoted her as the unmarried supporter of her teenage brother, Tommy. And for 7 years, from 1940 to 1947, Dale Evans lived this lie. Every interview, every public appearance, every piece of publicity material perpetuated the fiction that her son was her brother. Marrying Roy Rogers in 1947 finally allowed her to end the deception when Tommy was 20 years old. But the damage was done, at least in her own mind. Lifelong remorse about prioritizing her career over her son's upbringing stayed with Dale, and she later said this guilt, coupled with tensions with Roy's children from his first marriage, left her shaken, frightened, on edge, and at a loss for how to handle it. What's striking about this story is that it wasn't about Dale hating the studio executives who forced this deception, and instead it was a story of her own internal struggle and guilt. Tom Fox Jr. grew up to become a church music minister and was instrumental in Dale's Christian conversion, which suggests reconciliation rather than estrangement. When Tom died in 2012, his obituary described him warmly with no mention of family conflict. The stepchildren tensions. Roy Rogers' first wife, Arlene Wilkins, died in 1946, and when Dale married Rogers a year and a half later, she became stepmother to his children. The Los Angeles Times obituary stated that Evans found Rogers' children resented her new role as their stepmother. Guilt about her own son made this period particularly difficult for Dale, and now she was facing resentment from children who had recently lost their mother. Shaken and frightened was how Dale herself described this time. Cowboy Princess, Life with My Parents, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, came out in 2003 as a memoir written by Roy's adopted daughter, Cheryl Rogers Barnett. Reviewers noted that the book documented a very difficult relationship with her stepmother, Dale Evans, and Cheryl also expressed disdain for her parents' version of Christianity. But here's where the story takes a turn that shows Dale Evans' character, and the relationship improved significantly over time. Cheryl later stated, "I am most proud of having been able to take care of Mom and Dad. I'm an adopted kid, and it was a privilege to help them at the end of their lives, as they helped me at the beginning of mine." Support and encouragement from Dale became topics Cheryl discussed in later interviews. What started as resentment transformed into gratitude and care, and once again we see tension but not lasting hatred, conflict but not permanent estrangement. Why no enemies? An easy life for avoiding conflict can't explain why Dale Evans didn't have documented enemies. Looking at what she went through tells a different story entirely. Marriage at 14 and divorce by 17 came first. Raising a son alone from age 15 in an era when single motherhood was deeply stigmatized followed. 3 divorces before age 35 happened. Hiding her own son's identity for nearly a decade was forced upon her. Typecasting in a genre she didn't want to work in frustrated her. Billing below a horse insulted her. Getting fired for getting married happened. Resentment from stepchildren hurt her. And losing 3 children to tragic deaths broke her heart. Robin Elizabeth was born with Down syndrome in 1950 and died in 1952 at age 2. Her adopted daughter, Debbie, was killed at age 12 in a church bus crash in 1964. Her adopted son, Sandy, also known as John David, died at age 18 in an army accident in Germany in 1965. Any one of these experiences could have turned someone bitter, and together they could have created a person consumed by resentment and hatred. But that's not what happened. Dale Evans herself offered a clue to her personality when she said, "Roy is steady and dependable. I am hasty and impulsive. He is such a quiet fellow, and he has a way of taking life as it comes. No one has ever accused me of being shy or easygoing." Impulsive and passionate described her, yes, but she was also resilient. After suffering a stroke, she said, "I lay in the bed at the hospital and said, 'Let's see what I have left.' And I could see, I could speak, I could think, I could read. I simply tabulated my blessings, and that gave me a start. When knocked down, this was someone who took inventory of what remained rather than dwelling on what was lost. Strong religious faith also shaped her, and she stated, "Prayer, I couldn't live without it. I would have died 1,000 times if it had not been for my chance to talk it over with God." The criticisms that did exist, universal love and freedom from criticism weren't Dale Evans' reality, but the criticisms were ideological rather than personal. Religious opportunism was an accusation some people leveled at her. Biographer Theresa Kaminski wrote the first full-length academic biography using newly opened archives at the Outry Museum, and she noted, "This is a question that I've often seen come up, some people criticizing her and dismissing her as being opportunistic, that as she saw her Hollywood career fading, she attached herself to Christianity as a way of maintaining that." Indirect but firm was how Dale responded. "That's more important to me than all the rest," was what she stated when asked about being remembered for her faith versus her stardom. Feminist interpretations of her life created another source of tension. Self-supporting single mother from age 15 who controlled her own career in an era dominated by men describes Dale's reality, yet she later advocated traditional gender roles in her Christian books. Feminist historians saw contradictions in her life story versus her later teachings. These were ideological disagreements and debates about her public positions and legacy, but they weren't personal feuds or individual hatreds. What extensive research into Dale Evans' life failed to turn up is worth noting. No rivalry with Gail Davis existed, and Davis played Annie Oakley on television during the same era. Both women worked in Western TV during the 1950s, but in different productions, and they even shared the same stunt double named Alice Van Springsteen. Gene Autry had no personal feud with Dale. Roy Rogers and Gene Autry had a well-documented professional rivalry at Republic Pictures after Roy replaced Gene following a 1938 contract dispute, but Dale Evans had no documented involvement. Both Rogers and Autry actually worked to clarify misinformation when the studio tried to stir conflict between them. No documented rivalries with Republic Pictures colleagues or other Western actresses turned up in multiple biographical sources. Tom Fox Jr. maintained a positive relationship with his mother throughout their lives, and while Herbert Yates fired her, the relationship didn't devolve into a lasting public feud. The era she lived in and the image she cultivated both help explain why Dale Evans didn't have enemies. Hollywood during the studio system era tightly controlled actors' images, and public feuds could damage careers. But plenty of other stars from that era did have documented conflicts and rivalries. Joan Crawford and Bette Davis famously hated each other, and Olivia de Havilland and Joan Fontaine's sister rivalry was legendary. The absence of such stories in Dale Evans' history isn't just about the era, it's about her specifically. A wholesome, family-friendly image that later evolved into an explicitly Christian public persona is what Dale cultivated. Between 20 and 28 Christian books came from her pen during her career, and her most famous work, Angel Unaware, published in 1953, was written from the perspective of her daughter, Robin, and discussed faith, disability, and loss. Private animosities could have been hidden by this carefully maintained public image, but biographer Theresa Kaminski had access to previously closed archives and found no evidence of suppressed conflicts. What appears in public matched what exists in private correspondence and documents. A different kind of strength than we typically celebrate in Hollywood stories might be what Dale Evans' lack of enemies represents. Tales of divas who refused to be pushed around, of stars who burned bridges and made demands and created legendary feuds fill our usual narratives. Joan Crawfords who knew what they wanted and destroyed anyone who got in their way are the ones we celebrate. But Dale Evans' story suggests a different path existed. Advocating for herself happened, refusing to renew her Republic contract in 1946, leaving the studio with Roy Rogers in 1951 when they wouldn't allow television appearances, controlling her own career on her own terms. She did all of this without creating permanent enemies. Betrayal happened when Herbert Yates fired her for getting married, but she didn't spend the rest of her career in a public feud with him. Resentment from stepchildren happened, but she worked toward reconciliation rather than estrangement. Guilt about her son happened, but she maintained a relationship with him that ultimately brought her peace. Something strikingly progressive for her era came when she spoke about single motherhood. It is not only unfair but disgustingly cruel that the mother is always held responsible for the illegitimate child, while the father goes scot-free. Speaking truth to social injustice happened even as she navigated within those unjust systems. Our opening question about who Dale Evans truly hated more than anyone has an honest answer based on extensive historical research, and that answer is nobody. No documented evidence of Dale Evans harboring true hatred for any individual during her 50-plus years in Hollywood and her 88 years of life exists. Conflicts with Herbert Yates happened. He typecast her and then fired her, but it didn't become a lasting feud. Tension with stepchildren happened, but it evolved into reconciliation. Guilt about her son happened, but that was internal struggle, not hatred directed outward. Criticism about religious opportunism happened, but those were ideological debates, not personal vendettas. An extraordinary life that included 3 divorces, 3 children's deaths, studio betrayal, forced identity deception, and decades in competitive Hollywood was navigated by Dale Evans without making permanent enemies. And that might seem impossible or even unbelievable. The historical record is clear, though. Chris N's observation as a biographer captures it best. Few people were as honest, kind, and forthcoming as Roy and Dale. Feuds and rivalries defined an industry and an era, yet Dale Evans stands out precisely because she didn't have them. Whether that was calculated image management, genuine faith, remarkable resilience, or simply her personality, we can't know for certain. But what we can know is what the archives, biographies, and historical documents show. A woman who faced more than enough hardship to justify bitterness, but who chose a different path. February 7, 1901 brought her death at age 88 from congestive heart failure in Apple Valley, California. Remembered not for feuds or rivalries or hatreds, she left behind a legacy built on her partnership with Roy Rogers, her Christian faith, and her resilience through profound loss. The absence of a scandal in this case tells its own compelling story. Who someone hated isn't always the most interesting thing about a Hollywood life. And sometimes, what's more fascinating is that they managed not to hate anyone at all.